All right. So we are discussing chapter 1 today. And the reason why we're doing one chapter a week, we kind of found with our last book, by doing 2 chapters, we found that we were kind of rushing at the end and weren't able to discuss everything. So we're going to stick with 1 chapter a week and just kind of go from there. I really encourage everyone, if you're comfortable, to answer the questions. If you have questions, bring them up or write them down so that we can ask the authors at the end. Like I said earlier, they're a great couple, super invested in a trauma-informed kids ministry. So they're like, any questions you got, make sure you have them, write them down, and we'll give it to them. So, all right. So chapter 1, question 1, think about a time when you experienced a traumatic event in your life. Did you tell people at church about it? Why or why not? How, if at all, did people at church help you through this difficult time in your life? Is there anything you wish the church had done differently? And how does this experience influence the way you interact with trauma-exposed children and their families? Lots of questions for question 1, so let's hear what you guys have to say.
When I was an older teenager, so maybe 16, 17 maybe, there was a man in my church who was 30 years older than me who began to sexually groom me. And I've just gotten free of that through therapy within the last year or 2, so praise the Lord for that. But I did not tell people at church about it. I didn't even tell my parents about it because I was afraid of the judgment, the condemnation, I would have been blamed for everything. This gentleman was the treasurer of the church and he was not extremely wealthy, but he was well-to-do and his side would have been taken over my side, the story. They didn't help me through that difficult time because they didn't know when it was revealed that something inappropriate was going on. And I was past 18 by then. The worst part of it was when I was like 20. I was the pianist for the church at that point, and I had a key to the piano. And the pastor called me in his office and took the key away and basically told me that God would never, ever use me in ministry ever again because of what had happened. And that's not true because I've been in kidsmen for the last 25 years. So I was redeemed for the Lord. But as far as the way it influences the way I interact with kids, I haven't had any children at church come and reveal anything to me. Oh, but I would listen to their story. I would listen to both sides of the story. I would not say to the kid, well, I don't believe you, you're making that up. I would have much compassion and much grace for kids if they came to me with a story, even an older teenager. It's giving me empathy towards kids that may be in those kinds of situations. And my antenna are up for just watching men in the church. Not that I'm suspicious of any of them, but just I have my radar up, my antenna up, and just I would be able to notice it if something was inappropriate was going on. I have 5 daughters, 25, 24 down to 14. And it's something I've always kind of been just in the back of my mind aware of when there's, around men at church. And I've never noticed anything, but I know I would right away if there was something, because I would be able to tell because it happened to me. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so sorry you went through something like that, Mary Lou. That's horrible. Unfortunately, stories like that seem to be coming out more and more, though. And, we just need to pray for those women who've gone through those experiences, because that's just horrible. In God's house, that's just not right. So you'll be in my prayers as you continue to recover and bounce back from that. Anyone else would like to share? I don't mind sharing a little bit of my own. Growing up, my mom has always had chronic illnesses, very just debilitating. I've seen my mom in the hospital more times than I can count. And even as a child, that was very traumatic, seeing your parent with hoses and tubes, and it's horrible. And it doesn't get any easier, but our church knew, and we were, as a family, I would say we were supported in the sense of, meals, and people would come over to clean and help, but I never got to talk to anyone about it. And it's just kind of built up in me over time. And I wish someone would have talked to me as a kid on how I felt. Because I also had to grow up real fast too. I became the responsible person in our home because my dad, had to work. And so I just kind of took care of everything in the house. And last fall, I started seeing someone to kind of process everything I've been through and currently going through, because my mom is very sick now. But I wish that someone would have talked to me as a kid to see me as a person who in need. So I'm very sensitive to that now as an adult, similar to what Mary Lou was saying is, and I know a kid who hasn't been here in a couple of weeks, maybe because they're sick or their parents are sick. I reach out to them and make them feel special and important and acknowledged, because, it's not just the person who's going through it, is experiencing something, but obviously, as we read today, traumatic experience can be many different things for kids. So, yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on to question 2? All right. Well, children are much more likely to heal from their past trauma when they have support of a loving family, a professional therapist, and a caring church community. Why do you think each one of these support sources is uniquely important? And what can a church offer that a therapist can't provide?
In my church community, reading through this had maybe the opposite of the intended effect, not like anything negative, but reminding me how important it is to encourage families to go to therapy. We have a lot of families that would be pretty hesitant to go into therapy, just culturally, that's not something that they do. And so thinking about what a therapist provides that the church is not equipped to do when someone's gone through trauma. And just like the encouragement of like, sometimes these things need to be addressed one-on-one with someone who has deep experience in this specific thing, and encouraging those things. Because I know of myself, I can be inclined to take on more than I'm equipped to do and think that I can do the job of a therapist when that's not what I'm called to do, because the church has the unique opportunity to build up community where therapists typically, most therapy sessions do not involve building up community and helping build up like the kid-to-kid relationships. And, obviously, well, hopefully you have a Christian therapist, but, getting a chance to expose them to Christ and teach them about Christ's love. And then also even the community and healing relationships with adults, if that's been part of the trauma. Therapy is so individualized, which is incredible, but churches have this opportunity to heal some of those other relationships just because that's something that they have the ability to share.
I was going to say the same thing. I think one of the biggest differences is the community that you can build. I think therapists and counselors are really good for helping you to identify and then give you tools and strategies to deal with it. But I think it's in your community that you get more of that group to hopefully be able to lean on and just kind of help you get through the different things.
I've been in therapy for the last 12 years, 6 years, something like that. I can't remember, but the professional therapist, there were issues, other issues from not just the sexual grooming, but just stuff with my mom and stuff with one of my daughters. And no one in the church was qualified to help at all in any way with any of that trauma. And so I needed a therapist, and they have the professional skills and the training and all the knowledge about how to help you identify, like Kristen said, and gives you tools to work through that. But the one thing that my church community gave me that the therapist didn't was just prayer and support, and we're praying for you, and can we help you in any way? My 18-year-old daughter just a year ago was in a mental ward in a hospital for a week, and it was just the love and support from our community was amazing. Our faith community was amazing, and therapists, the therapists that I've seen have all been Christians, but they can't offer that same atmosphere just one-on-one that your church family can. And that was a huge blessing. They both were blessings, but I think we need all of them to help in situations like this. You're missing something if you leave one of them out.
I just kind of think about the power of prayer, and praying over people, over hurting people. And we know we also have a powerful God who can perform miracles, and all we have to do is ask. So I think that church aspect is so important. You know, you get the sense of community and support, you get Jesus and his love, and you get the opportunities to see miracles. I think professionals are so important too, because they're trained in it, right? I mean, yes, we can share Jesus and his love, and we can pray, but we also need that time where God gave someone else the talents and abilities to help us in a different way, and prompting the right conversations and giving you the tools and things to help process whatever you're going through or your child is going through. So I think it's a good trifecta. And then obviously family support. If you don't have a family who's like, yes, we've got you, yes, we support you in this, they probably even feel more isolated and alone, as the book did earlier, talked about, like they don't feel safe or valued. If they don't have that, it's not going to all work. So yeah, I think church can give you Jesus in prayer, and then the therapist can give you those tools to help you better yourself.
Well, another factor that we even discussed in the last couple of books is the influence of a loving, caring adult that's not part of your family. That if you have a child that is welcomed and feels belonged in a church setting, and someone comes alongside them to help influence them and care for them, then they're more likely to confide in that person because they know they're welcomed and loved. I mean, how many times have we heard stories of, moms of teenagers, somebody comes up and says, oh yeah, your child shared with me this. And, you've been working to get your teen to share with you, but they felt more comfortable in an unjudgmental forum to be able to talk to somebody within the church because they knew they cared about them. They were not judgmental. There would be no repercussions from that. And they felt like they could really open up and, kind of bare their soul to somebody. And even small kids, if they feel a safe environment there, and it's not always at home. Sadly, some of these kids are coming from home environments where that trauma is being inflicted upon them. And, I grew up in that atmosphere, and you don't have anybody outside the home because, back in my day, what happened behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors. You didn't reveal it. You didn't share that with anybody. And, therapists weren't actively used, back in that time frame. And so you just swallowed it. And we can see the impact today of people that had to live through that and wasn't able to find somebody that was there for them. And even more so, now we see our responsibility as KidMin leaders to make sure that we are that person who is loving and welcoming and willing to listen to somebody who's hurting.
I think that the church can also provide a role in the aftercare. Like we've talked a lot about during and as they're going through it all and kind of working through it, but kind of how I've always viewed the therapists as I've, visited them and stuff is they help you to unpack the things that are preventing you from moving forward. But kind of once you're moving forward and they see you as in a different light. And the church has that ability to provide mentorship, whether that's, for a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 32-year-old, or a 98-year-old. They have that, we've got people, we come with a whole walkload of life. Like none of us all are walking through the same stuff at the same time. And so I think we also have that aspect that we get to provide if we're doing it well. I think for myself and it's, I'm looking, this is all that trauma informed, and for me, a lot of some of my trauma came more from the church later on in life than as a young kid. But having those people that walk beside me after I've worked through it to help keep you on that track of seeing God through a different light, because often our trauma also changes how we view God. And so they get to help provide that healthier view and to help you wrestle with some of that stuff.
These are great thoughts. Any other points on this before we move on to question 3? All right, so question 3 says, recall the story of Lupe's grandchildren and the new church. How did Pastor Tracy help Mateo regulate his emotions? How did she help the children feel connected with adults and peers at church? How did she show the children that they were valuable and capable members of the church community? I really like this question.
I wrote down a couple of thoughts, and that was one, that she connected with them before she corrected them. She established that eye contact. She helped them find their voice and interacting them back and forth, especially with Mateo. She discovered what the issue was with him right away, especially when he said, he was going to protect his kid. And I think the statement that I can't remember the statement that he made, but it was, she came right up to him and said, I am not afraid of you. And so she established her authority with him in the very beginning, but she connected with him first. She realized that she was going to utilize him in other ways to involve him so he didn't feel ostracized or alone or left out. There was that healthy touch, it was just that connectivity that she had with him to make him realize that he was important. He wasn't going to be a problem child, but that he didn't scare her. And so, okay, now that we've established that, let's move on. Now you can help me with this. I think she established an authoritative tone of voice with him so that he understood that he wasn't going to get away with what he had with the previous churches that he'd been with.
I like that she sensed right away that his issue was fear, that he was afraid that someone might hurt him or his sisters. So she gave him a job to do that made him feel less frightened, like he got to lock the doors because that made him feel safe, and she kind of noticed that that would make him feel safer. So she, like Becky said, she identified what his issue was, and then she gave him a job to do. I really, really liked that. I struggle with identifying the need underneath the fault or the behavior. And she did that Pastor Tracy did that really well. And that was a really cool reminder to me to look past the behavior to what it is the kid's really asking for and really needs, but they can't necessarily put into words. You know, he would have never said, I'm scared, I need you to help me feel safe, but she knew that right away. And that was a good reminder for me.
I see a lot of kids do the, he says like everybody else is scared of me or something like that. And I see a lot of kids that like to test, like right away want to see how far does their love go. I don't think they think that consciously, but they want to, especially kids who have been denied love or care very often. I see that they're quicker to be the one who has control over that situation. I read the thing, well, I'm not scared of you differently. I like in my head, I heard, well, I'm not scared of you, and like moving on from it. And really just showing like, you're not going to get me, because it seems like kids in trauma, when they've been told that they're not good enough to be loved or appreciated, or that they're bad kids, they want to take the control from that situation and be the one who's like, they think I'm a bad kid because I did X, Y, and Z, versus these things that are out of their control. And suddenly they're stuck being like, the adult doesn't like me. Instead, they start switching to being like, I'm going to make the adult not like me. I'm in control of the situation. I'm in control of this relationship. And I like that she was like, she maintained control of like, you can do that. Like, let me show you how you can help. And like, just because you say that you think that you're a bad kid doesn't mean I automatically am going to agree with that. Which I really liked her interaction. I cried a lot when I was reading it.
The thing that stood out to me the most, it wasn't very specific in the very moment they first met, but they weren't a label, they were a name. And I think that is huge with kids, especially those who have experienced trauma. Most already know they're the problem child. And like Hannah was saying, they embrace it because that's their control. And when they finally find someone that reacts differently, or doesn't react at all, but instead is caring and loving and acknowledges them, that can be life-changing, as we read about Mateo, and giving them jobs and responsibility, making them feel connected or belonged, as we read in our resilient book last month. A sense of belonging is huge for kids. A sense of ownership is huge, because they then find value in themselves in that. So all these things she did made these kids not feel like outsiders. They felt part of something. They're part of something bigger. And then obviously in return of that allowed the grandmother, Lupe, to then feel belonged and a part of. And so we're not only, and in this story specifically, they're not just helping the trauma-informed child, they're helping this grandmother now too. As I read it, I was getting choked up, because I've worked with families like this, and seeing that someone took the time to help this family and not just cast them out or you can't come back. But Pastor Tracy did all of these things to make them feel valuable and capable. Even like how she took the one daughter, I don't know if it was Camila or Sarah, aside for tutoring so that she can still achieve the goal of verses. Like, she wasn't going to let her slide, but she was going to help her. And how did she help her? She built a relationship with her. She took time. So love over time is going to conquer many things. And I really feel that's what we saw in this story here is Pastor Tracy really took the time to get to know this family and serve them in a very big way.
What also stood out to me was that what she offered for them to do, like especially with Mateo, when locking the doors, and then they said, oh, she gives him a fidget when he's feeling anxious and stuff, and all of those things. But all I kept thinking was, they're not separating them, I guess is the best word. there's an S word that works. It's not coming to my brain. You know, so I'm sure there are other kids within her ministry that are, maybe they're not locking doors, but maybe they're hitting PowerPoint buttons or they're handing out papers. So he's not any different. He just gets this other job. And oh, you're fidgety. Oh, here's a fidget. I'm sure there are other kids sitting in that room who have a fidget that they're squeezing, because she is not, doesn't sound like she, you know, was like, oh, let's talk about it. She just had one there and here you go. And, you know, all those little adaptations that aren't big and they don't make them feel isolated or different. Cause I mean, thinking of how Mateo must have felt as a 10-year-old, like the last thing he wants to be is one of them. And they make that comment, we weren't one of, you know, oh, you're one of them. We were named, we were kids. And I think that that is so important. You know, recognizing that their behaviors obviously came from something. Yeah, that stood out to me, was that it wasn't isolating. It was just, this is what we do with kids who maybe can't sit, who maybe need a little extra help, maybe need this. It's not a, oh, you're one of them, so we're going to do this.
Yeah, she didn't make him stand out. She made him a part of, for sure.
I also really liked that, like you were saying about the tutoring with the other girl. I think sometimes in families like this, when you have a Mateo as one of them, he gets all of the attention. And even though it's negative attention, but he gets everything from every adult. And the girl who's dealing with her trauma by being mature and responsible gets nothing. They get dismissed. And it can be really hard when you're like, well, I need to stop a child from running out into the parking lot or punching another kid. Like, I have to give him my attention. Like, you can't ignore that. But I loved that she found a way to take care of like the sibling who can very easily disappear when they're dealing with the trauma in a more socially acceptable way.
All I could think of when I read the part about her tutoring Sarah one-on-one, man, she must have some amazing volunteers to just be able to go sit in a room with one of the students and tutor her and not have to like keep an eye on everything else that's going on in her children's ministry area on a Sunday morning.
I thought the same thing. Like, how is that even possible? And then she had to have a team, you know, all together that are also very trauma informed. And it's just like, I would love to interview Pastor Tracy. Can we arrange that, Jody? Can we have her on the call?
Let me talk to Robert and see what we can do. I was wondering if she was one of the like acknowledgement people at the front, or if there's anything quoted in the back. Kind of
Right.
I wonder if she was any of these people.
Right.
Guys,
But
I'm gonna give you some hope. They are out there. I have an awesome team and I don't have to sit there every Sunday making sure that their kids are all, they're there, and they do exist. But yeah, I think it goes back though to that trauma informed. Have you guys seen the INCM trauma informed ministry? They have like a whole 6-week course. Not, I don't know. I was reading the first chapter and I was like, I've read this somewhere. I don't know where I've read this because I haven't read this book before, but I think it's in that. I think they did an INCM 6-week long. It's like, if you belong to INCM, it's free. If not, it's $52. And they like walk you through the different types of trauma and different steps, but they also give you the tools to make a plan, which I'm guessing, judging by how well she's handling this, she already had in place. And kind of how to do that, what to say. Like, it's everything from here's the phrases you put on your board so your people are using the same phrase to all of that. So be worth checking out if you're, you know, feeling like I want the team that she has, maybe because she did the INCM training. I don't know. Or maybe she helped write it at some point.
Yeah, the authors of this book have their own trainings, and I'm pretty sure they are 6 weeks long. So they probably took that and made it for the INCM class.
Yeah, well, they may have had like, because I know they bring in like guest people to do like the courses, like they work with people who are actually like involved. And I don't remember who did it. It was years ago, but I feel like, yeah, I've read the first chapter somewhere and I'm thinking that's where I heard it.
I think we also have to be careful not to just assume that kids that have these behavioral problems are trauma induced. You know, if you've got a child with ADHD or who's on medication, they exhibit some of the very same symptoms. In reading this chapter, I saw a very high link between kids with ADHD and trauma. And so that's where that connectivity and that relationship comes into play, is that we need to find out about these kids so that we can help them most effectively.
That was
I feel
actually,
like that
Go
was
ahead.
one of the things, no, that she had said about, I don't know if she said it or one of the, I don't know, I don't remember where it was in there, but it basically was that idea of like, we don't have to necessarily know the trauma. Like we don't have to have the trauma background to know how we can address. And I feel like that was the same thing because my head kind of went to special needs. Typically the issues that we've had similar to this are more with our special needs kids. And the main reason I know that is simply because of their diagnosis. So I knew specifically with them, but I know that we have definitely fallen short in our ministry on what it looks like to try to partner with those families. And that's one of the things that I think I'm most excited about this is just to really see like what can we do in a very hands-on way to make it better, because I have had to have those conversations with families where unless you're willing to come in with your child, we cannot have them in the room.
I think it's also important to note, and this was I got from the, I think INCM or some other training thing I did. Trauma is dependent on the person. So if they list the ICEs, but trauma for anybody is really anything that is unexpected. So you and your kid could be driving down the street and you guys could witness an accident and you're like, oh, it's an accident, it's great. And they are completely and totally traumatized. And I think that's so important that we don't necessarily recognize, like, although they may have a strong family and it's not one of the ICEs, but like I'll use my son, for example. My brother lost their daughter. Oh, I think she's 3 years ago. But she was born, but she was born prematurely, like really prematurely. So she died. And so the kids understood that part. But what followed for the next like year and a half was legit like death threats from my son. And he's like 5, telling me how he's going to kill me and chop me up, and really, really dark and really deep. But what our psychologist said, because we were doing testing for ADHD and stuff, is that when kids experience death, it doesn't matter who, it could be the dog, it could be a great grandma, it could be a neighbor's friend. Sometimes, especially when they're little, their process is to then be like, to threaten, because if I can kill you, then I'm in control of when you die. And so they're in control, that in control piece. And so I think it's important to note that these kids may not have the bad backgrounds or the moving from foster care to foster care and all that. It could be just that, their mom had a baby and she lost it and they can't process what that means because they mentally can't handle it. And so I think that we have to be mindful of that, because it was very traumatic as a parent to have your son say that. But then once he kind of moved past and had kind of processed that, well, we got back to like, normal kid behavior. It wasn't as dark, and it was really, really scary to hear that. So if you have kids that are doing that, sometimes it helps to find out, like, was there a death in the family? Because it could be that grandma was sick and she died, but to the kid, grandma just died. And so it's traumatic. And so I think important that the family may not know of anything trauma related, but that the kid could be processing something at a different speed.
I kind of wrote that down as one of my questions, but I feel like it's going to be answered here later in the book. Like, is there a difference in between trauma behavior and like a diagnosis of ADHD? And are they then addressed the same or are they addressed differently? Because my son, who is ADHD, I've got tools in my belt that we use and have used. But does that look differently, for a child who's gone through trauma? Because maybe they're displaying the same behavior, frustration and anger. But I know with like my son, it's just he's overstimulated and needs a walk. Is it that then the same for a trauma-informed child? I would assume yes, but I don't know.
I taught public school before I started in ministry, and we would get a lot of training on like how to incorporate kids with special needs into your classroom. And I started noticing that at the end of almost every single presentation, they would talk about like, but this is just best practices. Like they would tell you like, slow down your speech, give clear instructions, write the instructions on the board. And then at the end, they'd be like, but no matter what, that is beneficial to every single student whether they need that tool or not, it's still good. And I think a lot of trauma informed things are similar to that, where it's like, it's, if they're telling you like, oh, you know, making that connection with somebody and making sure they feel like a name and not just a piece, like a cog in the machine. There's not any kid who's like, well, I don't have trauma, that was bad for me, like that was horrible that you made me feel seen and known and connected me on my level. So a lot of stuff I think is beneficial, like just best practices in general.
I think they play out differently too. Like the ADHD, we know ourselves, but sometimes for trauma, it's triggers. So you're looking for the same thing. But I would recommend, so one of the things we found, I have an ADHD, 2 of them now, but Brene Brown wrote Atlas of the Heart. And one of the things that works with kids, especially when they're flying off and they're like, I don't know why, like they walked into your room, suddenly they're losing it. She goes through all of the different emotions that we have and naming an emotion. So they're like, I'm freaking out. They don't know why they're freaking out, you know, because they're not even always aware that they're having these responses. But if you're like, I see you're feeling very frustrated. I see you're feeling very anxious. I see you're feeling very jealous, or I would feel envious if somebody had this happen. Sometimes that can help to play it down. So I found her book very helpful because she has like every single emotion and exactly like what that emotion is and how it looks and stuff. And it can be helpful with working with your kids to like even creating that safe space. Because then it also, one of the things she says in her book is that when we name an emotion, so we see a kid misbehaving and we can say a trauma-informed child and we say, oh, they're just bad. They're being disobedient. Well, how we respond to disobedient versus they're feeling frustrated, it triggers different things in our brain. And when they're frustrated, we're like, oh, we can help them. Or they're feeling scared, I can help them. But when we say, oh, they're just disobedient, well, now we got to punish them because they're, so it helps us also respond differently.
All right, moving on to question 4. Traumatic experiences can cause children to believe that God is not trustworthy or that they are not worthy of God's love. Fortunately, children's understanding of God can be reshaped by their experiences in the church. In your opinion, what 3 attributes of God are most important for children to understand? How does your ministry's policies and procedures reflect these attributes to children who have experienced trauma?
Based on my own experience with my growing up with my mom, who I had a terrible relationship with, my relationship with her formed some of my beliefs about who God was and how he would treat me. I thought, you know, she would say things like, well, be sure your sin's going to find you out. So I had this picture that God was waiting, just watching for the moment that I would sin, and then he was going to be whacking me over the head with the stick or the 2x4 or whatever. So I had that picture of God for a really long time. And it took a long time for me to get to the point where I realized that God loved me no matter what I did. He still loved me. May not have been, he didn't like the sin that I was committing, but he still loved me as a person. So I would say loving, that God was safe, that he wasn't intentionally out to harm me or hurt me and smack me over the head when I stepped out of line, so that he was loving, he was safe, and that he accepted me for who I was. Like, I was created in his image. I was, you know, he sent Jesus to die for me. He turned his face away from his own son so that I could have a relationship with him. I'm accepted by him. And those 3 things were just huge for me. And I didn't start realizing them until I was in my early 40s and I started going to therapy to deal with all my mom issues. So it took me, even though I grew up in a Christian home and been a Christian a long time, I didn't start really knowing and understanding and believing those things until I was in my early 40s. And it's kind of the drum that I beat with all my kids, now. God loves you, he accepts you, he's safe, like just over and over and over again. And in Mateo's case, he didn't feel like church was safe for him, but I'm sure that translated into him feeling like God wasn't safe either. And I really want to know more of the story of Lupe and her grandkids, like where Mateo and the girls ended up, because I just think that would be really fascinating to see the impact, and maybe we'll learn that throughout the rest of the book. But yeah, those are just my three that I would say off the top of my head.
Love was definitely the first one on my list as well. And then patience and grace. And I've been working really hard on like making sure that kids know that doesn't affect how I feel about them. Like even after we have a horrible time, whatever event they're there for, and it's horrible. I went to a TBRI training, which is trust-based relational intervention. I don't know if it's like a national program or just state level, but one of the things that they were like talking about, it's not a Christian resource, but it was just about trauma. Anyways, they talked about telling kids that they're valued and things like that, and that you're happy to see them. And I was like, I can implement that tomorrow. You go to a training and you're like, what am I gonna, this is too much information. Like tomorrow I can be sure that kids, I get onto their eye level and tell them I'm happy that you're here when they arrive. And then when they leave, I make sure that I say like, I am glad you came to church. Even sometimes I even clarify, because they know, like they know that they had a rough time too. Sometimes kids don't know that they were on your last nerve, and sometimes they absolutely know that they pushed every single button. And making sure that like, even though we had a rough time, I'm so happy that you came to church. I'm so glad that you were here. I love you. And making sure that that's something. And I think that that's part of that grace that, I mean, you see that's like the whole story of the Old Testament, especially, is just God continuing to reach out and connect and offer his love and his word over and over and over, despite the fact that the people don't do that. The Israelites don't accept it. So I think that grace is one of the really big things.
One of the things that actually came out of a camp experience for me, I had gone to camp. I was a speaker at camp. I wasn't attending, but and I really felt that I had to say this one message. Just, I mean, I don't remember what I wrote. I remember going up there every night and I'd be like, I've done this lesson before and I have no idea what's on this paper. But what came from it was, you're not a mistake. And that is the one thing that I tell all of our kids all the time, is like, God knows you. He is not surprised by anything you've done. You are not a mistake. There is nothing that you can do ever that will separate his ability to connect with you. You can walk away from him and he will still be sitting there waiting for you. So those are kind of the two big ones. And then like, he made you and he's got this plan for you. And it may not be what the world thinks. And you may not feel like you're how God wants you to be. And he knows what you've walked through, and he isn't surprised by anything you're going to do, anything you've done, anything that's happened. And he is open and ready to listen and to walk with you. And so those are kind of what I always tell our kids, that, I don't know, the experience over You're Not a Mistake kind of solidified that there are kids in this world who think that that's the truth, that they were a mistake. And yeah, I had a teen come up later and be like, I needed to know that because I was not in a good space. And it was like, oh my word. But yeah, so those are what we kind of tell a lot. Obviously the Jesus loves you and all of that stuff, but those are the three messages that I constantly tell, because I keep thinking of how our like 9-year-olds are going to grow up to be 12, 14, and those messages get harder and they get harsher, and they need to have it already instilled that I'm not a mistake, that I'm wanted and I'm needed, and that there's a plan for me somewhere. And it's not high school. It's beyond that.
I also wrote down love as the number one, trustworthy, and grace. And just kind of like as Hannah was saying, we've been studying with the Gospel Project, the people of Israel, and just this endless cycle that they are in. But to show kids that through all of that, God kept his promise, God kept his covenant, and he still does today. It also brings the song to mind, Same God. I don't know if you guys have heard that yet. Powerful, great song. And it talks about how It mentions the God of Abraham, the God of David, the God of Mary, the God of Jacob is still the same God today. And how he answered prayers in the past, he's going to answer them now. How he healed in the past, he's going to heal now. I mean, that song is just so powerful and so good. Yeah, I would just want kids to know that God has kept his promises. Let's look at the Bible and see all these things that he said he was going to do, and he did, and he still does. The other thing I think that's really important is teaching them that God is a God of grace, and showing them the villains of the Bible, like Zacchaeus, what of a horrible guy Zacchaeus was, and everybody hated him. And yet Jesus said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to your house. And that Jesus loved Zacchaeus despite the choices he made. And then after Jesus talked to him, he saw the importance of making good choices. Or even how Matthew, one of Jesus's own disciples, was a tax collector, and everybody hated tax collectors, but Jesus still loved and chose Matthew to be the special, disciple. I think teaching kids that God is gracious and forgiving, and it doesn't matter what you've done in God's eyes, you ask for forgiveness and it's gone. And Jesus sees you as perfect and holy, I think that's important that kids know that.
So the next question talked about the policies and procedures. Right now, I don't know. I know of maybe 3 kids in my group of children that could possibly have some trauma stuff, but one was adopted right, his birth mother gave him up for adoption. So he's, he was with his adoptive parents right through, right almost from the moment he was born. And the other ones come from a family where the mom and dad aren't married, but they've been together for a really long time, but both parents have had some mental health challenges. But when I think about the policies and procedures manual that our youth pastor and I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago, it doesn't say anything in there about how to deal with kids that have trauma. There's like, at that point when we wrote it, I don't think that was on either of our radars about any of that kind of stuff. So it's making me think that I need to go back and look at it and see what we need to change or add to the procedures manual that would let childcare workers know, even with like our youth group kids with our teens and stuff, what we would expect if we had a kid that had trauma. So that's an action item for me to go and look at that and see how we can improve it.
Does anyone have a policy or procedure for a scenario like this, for trauma, for children who've experienced trauma? Does anyone have anything like that formally written? Maybe by the end of this book we will, or get some inspiration from the authors on how to best write one or what that would look like. Obviously with each church it would look different, but I think that's a very good thing to challenge us to do. I think sometimes it's in our mind, oh yeah, this is what I'll do if a kid, has a meltdown, but does everybody know? So
I was thinking about this and I'm kind of looking at from their perspective how things worked out and stuff. And I wonder if it's less policy and procedure, because a lot of these kids, what works for kid A is not even going to work for kid B, even though they might have exactly the same behaviors. And then you've got volunteers who are like, but I did what you told me to do. And I wonder if it's culture, like we recognize that kids who are sitting under the table and are silent, like they're not pinching people's toes and biting them. They're just sitting there. Yes, they might be a little distraction for today, but they're not bad. They're not disruptive. The kid that needs to run from the room, I mean, we need to have those in place, but I wonder if it's a cultural shift of, and not just in kids ministry, because as soon as they walk out the doors, trauma doesn't just magically disappear when they turn 12. It'll be something that they're going to carry over and over. And I think it's something that we need to brace as a church, because it's the kid that's sitting in the service that is now losing their mind because the person beside them is wearing blue and that's the trigger. Or, there was a song and now they're mad because that's not true and that's a lie because that's not whatever they believe. And there's that, it's something I think we have to work with our leads on, because you also need your lead support if this is how you're handling things and whatever. And kids, kids need a multi-network. So yeah, that's just a thought. I'm sure there is, I know that there are steps and stuff that are helpful, but to look at it more as we need to shift our culture to accepting these, because I don't think for Lupe, if the whole church wasn't behind it, or at least a really large chunk of it, that wasn't part of their culture, that it would have been as receptive. Like, no, the pastor would not have been able to go off to the room because that would have been seen as favoritism or whatever, people concoct these days.
I'm finding that churches with leadership that have had significant trauma in their life or have seen it in a family member are more sensitive and prone to have something more developed in their church. I think of Sean Thornton's church in Westlake, California. He has a huge department that's just specifically devoted to special needs because of how he grew up in a very traumatized home. And he's very sensitive to that. And so he makes sure that his staff is very specially trained in the needs of kids who either are going through trauma or have, whatever special need they're going through. I'm finding in other churches that we have been a part of that those staff members who are very sensitive to that are very open and willing to incorporate that into their children's department. The church that we're at right now, they have a very special team that's just focused on special needs. They go through training, they have resources and materials, and they have someone, if they identify a child with special needs, whether it be trauma or ADHD or whatever, they bring that staff member in and they are one-on-one with that child throughout their Sunday school experience or their midweek experience. So they have a team of people that are just dedicated and focused to working with that child one-on-one, which is ideal in a larger church. Wouldn't it be great if in smaller churches we could incorporate that same thing? But even if we had one person who was dedicated to that education and training in special needs, could just be on call for, so-and-so is in church today, so would you go from this department to this department and just be with them? And you see the growth and the acceptance and the love that is shared with this special needs child, that they do feel like they belong, that they're not set apart. They're not asked to sit in the back of the room or sit in the hall. My goodness, I've seen that in churches where it's just a discipline thing. You're misbehaving, so you go out and sit in the hall. Well, what's that going to do to a trauma-inflicted child? That's, another Mateo incident right there. So, I appreciate that maybe there aren't a set of rules written, but that there are people trained in order to be able to work with these kids.
And I've got a feeling that's what we'll learn as we get into that latter half of the book. I think they said chapters 4 through 10, as we look at each area and how we can help kids with that. And I agree. I don't think it's going to be a set of rules or suggestions, because like we've all, no kid is ever like, not one adult, like none of us are all exactly the same. And approaches work differently with all of us. So I think keeping that open mindset and just having those tools in your belt, as we'll read, is what's going to help us most effectively. Because it just breaks my heart. And I can think of the church I grew up in. We put kids out in the hallway all the time. I remember you were bad, you go and sit in the hallway, or you had to go sit with your parents, and that was really bad, but yeah, definitely don't want to be the church like that. We want to be accepting and loving and supportive of all kiddos. So, well, we're gonna wrap up for today. Next week will be chapter 2 on recognizing trauma in the children's ministry. And we'll meet again, same time, 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. Don't mind the 10:30 note on the Zoom call thing. Just a little bit of a typo, but we will be meeting here at 1:30 next Friday. or Thursday, not Friday, sorry. Days are almost up. Would anyone like to close in prayer for us today?
I'll close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the love, the truth, the grace, the wisdom that you are. We look at your attributes and we have so much to aspire to, Lord, and following the example of Christ. We pray that you would help us as we endeavor to reach these children and these families who are inflicted with trauma. We pray that you will give us wisdom and guidance on the procedures that we should follow and the training that we should receive, that we would be sensitive to them, that you would use us in their life to help them to feel loved, welcome, belonging, and loved, just overall loved, Lord, that they are a part of us, that they are the church family, that they're not to be ostracized or set apart. Help us to just love them as you love us. Father, as we go through this book, we pray that you would just bring insights that maybe we haven't thought about before or that we could utilize in our daily ministries. Help us to be sensitive to you, to make sure that we are also growing in our knowledge and faith and prayer and Bible reading, Lord, that we continue to improve and grow. We just thank you for this time. I appreciate Jody and Jackie and their leadership of this group, and just pray that you'll bless each and every person that's a part of this group today, and that you will just give them a blessed week, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Becky. I appreciate that. All right, guys, I hope you have a great weekend, great Sunday in your services, that all volunteers show up and not sick. And it just is a great, great Sunday. I'll see you guys next week.